PNMsoft webinar, Managing Change in BPO. I'm here with my colleague Paul Sheridan, and we'll be running you through a couple of slides just introducing how PNMsoft's BPM product Sequence can be used to help manage change within a business process outsourcer. So without further ado, we shall start the webinar. Those of you familiar with GoToMeeting, you will know how to ask questions. Those of you that aren't, there is a questions option within GoToMeeting. So please feel free to ask questions as we go through, but we'll answer those at the end if that's okay. Okay, so now let me pass you over to Paul Sheridan.
Hello everybody, and many thanks for attending the webinar. Just a brief view on PNMsoft, the company, before we get into the main body of the meeting. PNMsoft is a global enterprise with customers across the world. We support the product Sequence, and we are a member of the Microsoft Business Process Alliance. We also won the finalist of the Year award in 2009 in the SOA and BPM category, and last year we were very pleased to be awarded by Gartner the Core Vendor for BPM. One of our main differences is that not only do we provide Sequence as a BPM platform, but we also bring content and solutions and frameworks to accelerate the business process that is being looked to be designed. And one of those areas that we concentrate on as a market is providing solutions and frameworks for the business process outsourcing market, as well as the project management office. And you can just see from our sort of global customer base, we usually aim at sort of fairly largest enterprise organizations. So Sequence, which is the product, is a framework that is built on our BPM platform and designed specifically for those in the business process outsourcing market or project management offices where there is probably levels of complexity and levels of change and change management that is either driven from the project team itself or from the customer environment. And by using our product, our customers are gaining greater efficiencies and increasing their ability to create margin with reduced headcount in the administrative functions. And some of the process examples that Sequence can be used is around managing the change requests, managing the bid or tender process within an organization, managing project initiation and controls, the contract and document lifecycle that flows through a BPO or a PMO contract, and supporting customer-centric activities like service desk and the ticketing help desk system. So one of the scenarios that we're going to go through today, and the demonstration of Sequence that you'll see, is all around managing change and the change management problems that exist for a business process outsourcer or a large project management office. In these type of environments, it's quite often the case that there are manual processes dealing with requests to change, and that the change request process itself can be quite inefficient. The consequence of that is that you can, as a supplier in the business process outsourcing market, be criticized about missing your service level agreements that are contractual. This is compounded by having no consistency around the processes to manage the relationship and the collaboration that has to exist between a system integrator and the customer. And if there are penalties associated with missed SLAs, especially in the government environment, those penalties can easily eat the margin that is being created within the original contract. Part of supporting the BPO contract, and from a PMO perspective, having the executives being able to understand exactly what's going on in real time is key to supporting their decision making. And having a single point of truth from the various different data sources and tracking the metadata is a key component in driving better decisions and employing resources to the right projects in a timely fashion. And Sequence is a great way of being able to track a single point of truth. And in the demonstration we'll show you how our dashboards and the reporting is key to managing change. Also, managing the revenue streams that come from a large business processing outsourcing contract is important. And again, where there are manual processes or data that is hidden in remote Excel spreadsheets, sometimes can lead to the loss of opportunities and extra revenue, when managing change itself could be a revenue potential that a business process outsourcer is not able to maximize. Reducing management costs and speeding management decisions and making that visible both within the PMO organization or being able to communicate that in a timely fashion to your customer is also a huge benefit in creating better customer trust and customer satisfaction, and would often lead to a more preferential set of discussions around contract renewal time. And so one of the major advantages our customers are having from deploying Sequence to manage change within the PMO environment is that improved customer satisfaction often allows for contract renewal or extension of contracts as a way of gaining better margin and increased revenues. So now I'm going to hand over to James, who's going to take you through the demonstration.
Okay, thanks Paul. Just bear with me a moment while I start my virtual environment up. Okay, just with you in a moment. Okay, so thanks for that, Paul. Paul's introduced you to the concept of Sequence and how it can be used to manage change within BPOs. I'm now going to run you through a fairly detailed demonstration of Sequence and specifically our change management framework that's called On-Demand Assist. Just to give you a flavour, not so much the capabilities of the product from a features and functions point of view, but more from a benefits perspective. And here on the screen we can see 5 people that are involved in the process of change within a business process outsourcing contract. I would just like to add the suppliers to change management, whether it relates to BPO, whether it relates to systems integrators, or even internal IT. It can relate to all of those situations as well. But here we're focusing on that more outsourced environment. And we have 5 individuals, as I say, who we can see here on the screen. And at the centre of any BPO is, of course, the customer. So our customer is sitting here. She has 4 people from the outsourcer that are working on her accounts. We have our PMO director that's heading up the project management office. We have the account manager that's responsible for the relationship. We have the account director that's sitting at that high level, probably with multiple accounts that he is directing. And we have the PMO manager that has more day-to-day responsibility of managing the project management office within the particular outsourcing contract. And here on the screen you can see 4 questions that these individuals managing the account may well ask on a day-to-day basis. And the way that I'm going to demonstrate the solution is how we can answer these questions. The PMO director, he may ask the question, my customer is unhappy with our performance, but my team are telling me we're providing a good service. So how can he get good visibility on all the changes that are coming from the customer and how well his team are managing those through to completion? The account manager may have a customer who is called with an urgent issue that needs a change to the service. How can he work with the customer to initiate that change and manage that change through to its completion quickly and effectively? The account director, concerned about the revenue that's coming in as part of the contract from changes, his forecast for Q1, for quarter 1, is too low. How can he have visibility on in-flight requests that he may well be able to pull into this quarter in order to be able to increase his revenue for that quarter? And then finally, the PMO manager responsible for day-to-day management, she sees that the overspend on projects is far too high. How can she improve the process to make it more robust, have an extra level of approval in the process in order to be able to have a more efficient, more effective offering to the customer? So these are the 4 questions that I'm going to run through, time permitting, just to show you how our BPM framework for BPOs can help manage change within those accounts. So we'll start off, we're going to look at how we can see the performance of the teams. Now, Sequence, it's all built on Microsoft technologies. We use SharePoint as our front end, as our BPM portal. And here you can see just one example of how Sequence and SharePoint working together can deliver a very powerful but very easy to use front end to the users. And here we can see on the page we have a combination of lists of tasks from Sequence that the user needs to action, but also some information, some management information on how the service that they're providing to the customer is going. And we mentioned earlier, if you remember, we are the PMO director, and he's interested in SLA performance. He has his own tab. If we click on that tab, he can see in one concise view exactly how the SLA is performing. The 2 parts of this dashboard that we're interested in are in the middle, the KPI gauges. With Sequence, we can have KPI gauges that can show the value of that KPI at a glance. But here we can see how we can have red, amber, green indicators on those gauges, so at a very quick glance we can see if it's good news or bad news. On a year-to-date basis, we're doing okay, we're just in the green. But here we can see on a quarterly basis, we're actually starting to creep into the amber. We're heading in the wrong direction. We want to manage this issue before we start getting into the red. And this is perhaps why my customer has the perception that the service isn't as good as perhaps the team are telling me. But I've now seen that there is an issue. Whereabouts in my organisation is this issue? All I know is that overall we're not doing as well as we need to be doing. With Sequence, we have drill down capabilities. I can drill down on this KPI, and it will then show me all of the constituent parts that make up this particular KPI. I can see all the different teams that are involved in managing these change requests and how they're performing. Across the top, I can see these 3 groups are in the green. I don't need to worry about them. My unified communications team, they're doing well. My network team are perhaps not doing as well as I would like, but here in the bottom right I can see my software development team definitely have an issue. We need to look at this, we need to address why are they currently running at 25 days. And from here I could then drill down a further level to the search view, where I could then see all of the tasks, all of the requests for change that have come in that are currently being handled by the software development team. And here we're seeing Sequence's powerful search capabilities, where I can search on pretty much anything that I would want to. And on here, we can find the information that we want very quickly. So we mentioned earlier, it's about getting visibility on the particular changes, where they are and how we're progressing. So from this view, the PMO director will then be able to say, okay, I can see which change requests are sitting with the software development team. I can understand why they're taking longer. I can find out who they're with and manage that issue through to resolution. So there, hopefully, you'll get a feel, just one of the ways the PMO director can understand at a very high level how his particular part of the business is performing, how we are doing on this particular contract for a particular customer. Let's move on to the next stakeholder, our account manager. As I mentioned, the account manager has called to discuss an urgent, the customer has called to discuss an urgent issue and requires a change to the service. So here, what we're going to show is actually how you can use Sequence to request that change and then to manage the change through to completion. Again, we'll open up our portal. Now here, we're looking at the supplier end side of the portal. Of course, the advantage of Sequence is you can provide portals for the customer as well. So the customer can see the tasks that they are involved with. They can see performance as the BPO supplier wants to provide to them. And within here, I can see the list of all of my open RFCs, and I can request a new RFC. So the account manager talks the customer through on the phone, say, please go to your customer portal, go to the RFCs in progress page, and click on the new RFC link. All very simple and straightforward, and this brings up the form that the customer needs to complete in order to request the RFC. As I mentioned earlier, Sequence is all delivered through the browser, and this includes the ability to be able to complete web forms in order to be able to action a task or to kick off a particular process. We use our own web form technology, very powerful but easy to use. You can have your own branding, look and feel. In fact, some of our BPO customers, they will brand each form with the branding of the particular customer. So Sequence can know which account we're currently dealing with and brand the form accordingly. And as you'd expect, these forms have all the usual web form capabilities, such as many types of controls, some text fields, drop-downs, date pickers, text areas. And with all of these, you can have validation on these controls, from having them either just mandatory or optional, through to being able to put more sophisticated validation using regular expression validation. So the customer needs to fill in the form. I can do this quickly. I have a little auto-fill capabilities. But I go through filling in all the areas as required. And each of the options that are available in this drop-down can be specific to the appropriate customer. Just take me a couple of minutes just fill in the form. It's quite a comprehensive form. What I'm actually requesting here is a new request for change solution, of which, of course, Sequence is a perfect solution. Yes, we have budget. We say who it's been sponsored by. We can upload documents, multiple documents to support the request for change. So if the customer has, say, requirement specifications, they can all be uploaded as part of the request for change. I can click Submit. Now that's all the customer needs to do. They don't need to do anything else. They don't need to know what needs to happen next. Sequence takes care of that for them. Over here on the left, we can see exactly what has happened. We can see it has now gone to the internal change request step, that the BPO or the project management office, whoever it may be, the suppliers, will then handle this request coming in. And I'll talk through how we actually do this in a moment. So let's close that request down, and we'll go in as a PMO administrator, a project management administrator. You should saw the task was sent to the project management team. So I'm now logged on as Peter Green, and we can see here he's now got a second task. This task, he can see when he's received the task, and he can see when the task is due. Sequence is very powerful at managing service level agreements, which are obviously key in business process outsourcing contracts. Peter can understand when he needs to action this task, and he can see by this red, amber, green indicator whether or not the particular task is overdue, or in this case, it's amber, it will go overdue within a short space of time. Peter can open the task. But what we can see over here is this task has actually been sent to the PMO admin team. This is a group of 4 people, of whom Peter is one of the members. What we've done here, the scenario is, we want one of these 4 individuals to action this task, but we don't necessarily know who's free at the time. So we send a notification of the task to everyone, and the next free individual fetches the task off the queue. And that's what Peter will do by clicking at the link at the top of the screen. Now that he's done that, we can see it's disappeared from the list of tasks of the other individuals. They don't need to worry about it. It's now Peter's task. He has full control of this particular action. He fills in the details that he needs to fill in. Now, the important part here is he is going to decide who is going to manage this particular request for change. In this scenario, that's called the ICR manager, the internal change request manager. What we're going to do, we're going to send this to Tom Watson. He's going to be our ICR manager for this particular request for change. And we'll give him some notes. Now, this is one way that we can distribute work amongst a team. Another way could be using the queue mechanism that I showed. Another way could be to connect to a resource management system and ask that to provide us with an appropriate person with the appropriate skills who is currently free. But here, for the purposes of this demonstration, we keep it relatively simple. And we submit the form. Now over here we can see we've sent acknowledgement to the customer. Again, one of the best things that can be done as part of managing a request for change is to keep the customer informed, to save the customer having to phone up and see exactly what is happening. And the second step that's happened is we've sent a task to Tom Watson, who's our solution manager or ICR manager, for him to action the next step. I'll just do one more or a couple more steps. Hopefully now you're getting a feel for how work can move between different people involved in the process, but importantly how we can keep the customer automatically updated as we go through managing the change request. So let's come out of Peter's environment, and we'll go and have a look at Tom's environment. Now Peter, he used the Sequence BPM portal to manage his workload. Tom doesn't receive many tasks in sequence, so rather than having to remember to go into the portal to see what work he has, he likes to use Outlook. He receives emails from sequence telling him when he has tasks and updating him on the progress of the processes. Now here we're seeing this in Outlook. Of course, this is an HTML email that Tom has received. He could receive this via smartphone, via webmail, any other HTML-enabled web client. And within these HTML emails, we can include as much information so that Tom knows exactly what is going on as we feel is relevant. So lots of information about the process, this particular request, and how it's progressing. And at the bottom, we have a link to action the task. So Tom doesn't need to go and log on to a separate application. He can just click on the link. It will take him straight into the form that he needs to action this task through. So here's the form that he needs to complete. Going to provide some initial costs. And of course, any of this data can be used later in order to decide which route we're going to take through the process. This is only £3,000 or euros or dollars, depending where you are in the world. And this could be a low-cost request for change. We may decide that because it's low cost, we only need to go through one level of approval. If it's a higher value, we may want to send it through high levels of approval. The process doesn't support that. Well, we'll see in the next part of the demonstration how we can add that step. Tom then needs to decide which resources that he wants to use, not in actually delivering this request for change, but just purely in compiling the response back to the customer to say, this is what we propose, this is how much it's going to cost, and this is when we can do it by. And because in BPO contracts these can be expensive, they can take quite a while just to compile the response, Tom needs to use some specialized resources. But again, different requests for change may warrant the use of different resources. So we could use business rules to decide who we're going to involve. But in this case, we're going to allow Tom to be able to select who is going to be involved. This is an element of case management capability that's very powerful in sequence, whereby the user can select what happens next, which ad hoc steps are going to happen within the process. And in this case, he only needs a technical architect. We don't need the other resources. Because it's a fairly simple request for change. You notice down here on every form we've completed who the form is completed by and the completion date. Just one of the ways the audit trail is provided within sequence so we know exactly who has done what and when. And then when we click submit, Tom clicks submit, he'll see that the only step that's happened next is for the technical architect to action that particular step. If we'd have selected some of the other resources, they would have received tasks as well. Part of this, we've let the PMO admin team know what has happened. But Kent Middleton, he is the technical architect lead. He has received the task and he will be the person that decides which particular technical architect is going to be involved in this particular resource. Now, I won't go through any more steps. This is actually a very long process. There's about 80 steps, going through approval cycles and then letting the customer know the results. We shall see more of that process later when we actually go into the design environment. But hopefully now you're getting a feel for how sequence can be used, first of all by the customer to submit the request, and then by the supplier to manage that request all the way through to completion. So the account manager there he has allowed his customer to be able to submit a request, and by managing it closely through sequence, the customer will get the response as quickly as possible. The customer's happy because they get a timely response, but also the supplier's happy because they can then have the request for change signed off and approved, and they can start work on that. Most importantly, that means that they can then invoice for the revenue for that particular request for change that much sooner. Which leads me nicely on to the next question from the account director. The account director is very focused on the numbers, and he sees that the forecast for Q1 is too low. So what can be done to pull some revenue from Q2 into Q1? Let's have a look at what information we can provide for our account director. So again, we'll look at our dashboards. With Sequence, you can have as many dashboards for as many people as required, specific for that particular roles. So here we can see this is how our account director knows that we're in the red for this quarter. He needs to try and push it at least up into the amber. But the other two bar charts that we're seeing here is showing the value of the revenue of requests for changes as that's flowing through the process, both on the supplier side, so those processes within the project management office, but also on the customer side, because the customer is involved in this process in approving the costs and signing the request for changes off. So what we're showing here, the account director, is the amount in millions of pounds of change requests at each step in the process. Now, of course, those that are early on in the process, we can't really influence much. They need to go through the process, they need to have a response created, that needs to be sent back to the customer and so on. But what we can influence are those requests for change that are ready for delivery. If we can actually get the customer to sign those off and we can deliver them, then we can invoice the customer, and that will bring the revenue in earlier. So here we can see we've got 1.49 million pounds worth of changes. How can we understand which they are so that we can speak to the appropriate solution manager to try and bring those into the quarter? We can do that just by clicking on the appropriate bar, which will then drill down into another dashboard and show us, of that 1.49 million, this is how the revenue is split across all of our solution managers. Okay, so we can see Emma Violet is probably a good starting point. She's got £240,000 worth. Let's click on her bar and drill down another level to the sequence search form, which we can see here. Because I clicked on Solution Manager as Emma Violet, Sequence has automatically populated that and has returned me the search results that relate to Emma Violet. So I can see her £240,000 is made up of 3 requests. And I can speak to Emma and I can say, look, is there any chance of bringing any of these in earlier? Can we get the customer to allow us to deliver these so we can invoice them? So what we're trying to show here is how the account director can start at a high level, can see how much revenue is at various different stages within the process, and how we can then drill down to identify particular requests that could then be brought in earlier to therefore bring our revenue onto the books earlier. We can, of course, look at the customer side as well. The customer has £1.7 million waiting to be signed off. Let's click on that bar and see how that's split across the different customer business units. And we can see HR have a particularly large amount. Well, if we click on that, that will then show us all of the requests that HR the customers have with us. And we can speak to the customer. We may have a particularly friendly contact in HR, and we can say, look, is there any chance of getting some of these requests for change signed off so that we can bring them in earlier? It's all about having the information to then be able to manage the business that much closer. So that's the account director. We can see how the account director can have visibility on effectively his revenue pipeline, where the revenue that relates to change is, how much there is, and when he or she can expect it to be able to be invoiced and therefore hit the books. Our last stakeholder is our PMO manager. She's noticed using the dashboards that far too many of the projects are going overspent. It doesn't seem to be the smaller projects, the lower values, it seems to be the higher value projects. So she's realised if we were to put an extra level of approval in, we may well be able to have a more robust process. We can check the quotes that are going out to our customer and hopefully have more accurate quotes, therefore reducing our overspend. So what she's going to do is effectively make a change to the process within Sequence. So here's your first look at the Sequence design environment. Just like the end users interact with Sequence through the browser, so do the process designers, making the solution perfect for a BPO, creating a hosted or a software as a service solution. It's a full multi-tenancy environment, again making it ideal for the environment that we're discussing today. So here's the process that we've been running through. It's a fairly complex process, as I say. The Sequence design environment is aimed at business users. It's an environment that is easy to understand, quick to make changes to, quick to implement the process in the first place. The beauty of this is you'd be able to sit down with your customer and say, Mr. Customer or Mrs. Customer, this is how we are going to manage your changes. And you can discuss with the customer any particular alterations to that particular process. And using Sequence's templating capabilities, take a copy of the master request for change process, duplicate it and use that as the basis for a customer-specific process. And that can be done very quickly and very easily. It's not an IT development exercise. It's a technically oriented business analyst or someone of that sort of skill set that can make changes. And another benefit of this environment is it is very quick to both get those processes up and running in the first place, but then also to make changes to them as we identify bottlenecks, issues with the processes, possibly improvements to the process. So our PMO manager, she has identified that we need an extra approval step in the process for larger projects. Let's say over £100,000, they need to go to an extra level of approval. I'm just very quickly going to walk you through this process, just so that you can relate that to what I showed you when we raised the request for change earlier. The customer filled in the RSC form. We have some technical bits and pieces that are going on behind the scenes that aren't really relevant to our particular demonstration today, but this is how we can use SharePoint to manage all of our change requests as well. So all documentation can be published to SharePoint. Our PMO admin team then filled in a form. The solution manager then filled in his form, and he decided which of these resources that he needed to use. Once those resources have actioned those tasks, we were then going to create what we call our internal change request. So this is the proposal that would go back to the customer to say, this is how much it's going to cost, what we're going to do, and how long it will take. Once we have created this, it will then go for internal approval. Now here is where we want to add our extra step. We want to add an extra step saying, if it's over a certain value, in this case £100,000, we want an extra level of approval. So I'm going to add another task to this process. I do that using the task activity option on the left. I'm going to call this second approval. Now you'll notice I'm using configuration wizards here. I'm not coding in order to be able to create this task. Reusability is very important within BPO environments in being able to share best practice across multiple accounts. And Sequence enables that sharing of best practice both in the process templates I mentioned earlier, but also in forms as well, in being able to have a form library, being able to share forms across multiple accounts. So here I'm going to duplicate an existing form. We already have a form which is very close to the one I want. There's the earliest step in the process called internal approval, and I can select that. So rather than having to start from scratch, it will create the form for me. I can then add the appropriate look and feel, everything to it, make any changes to that particular form as appropriate. And once the activity has been created, I've got the form, I can move the activity up to where it needs to be in the process. I can now decide who it's going to go to by creating a message that will be sent to the recipients of this task. I give it a subject. If you remember the HTML emails that went out, they had nice look and feel branding on them. I don't need to worry about that as the process designer. I just need to define the subject and the body. Sequence will take care of the rest for me. But I can include information, data from the process by selecting where the information is within my process. Each field on a form, each call to a web service, each of those inputs and outputs is a process field that I can then use to either include in my messages, include on forms, and so on. So I can come through here, I can say it's been raised by, this is the customer name. I click on the customer's name, and Sequence will replace this field with the name of the actual customer who has requested this change. I can of course include as much information as you saw on the email that Tom received, but just for the purposes of time, we'll just have the one field. And I can then decide who it's going to go to. I can send it to a named recipient. We don't normally recommend that. I can send it to particular departments. I can send it to some employee roles. In fact, what I'm going to do here now is get my CFO and my CIO to give second level approval for these particular, this particular change. I don't know who the CFO and the CIO is at this time. Sequence takes care of that for me. It will send this task to those two individuals at the time that it executes. And I can specify the due date. You saw earlier it was 1 working day. I may want to say this is 3 days. And if I want it to be by working time, I just tick the box, and that will use Sequence's calendar capabilities to work out from today when 3 working days is, and therefore when the due date is. Lots more I can say about that, but we're fairly pressed for time, so I'll push on. So that's the step completed. I just need to join it in. We'll break the connection here. And we're going to link our process in. Now I could just join it together like that, which means the CIO and the CFO will receive this task whatever the value of the request for change is. But we only want this step to be included if it's over £100,000. So we put what we call an if-else activity on this connection. And here we're defining a true or false expression. If this is true, we'll go one way, else we'll go that way. And to do that, I need to define a business rule. We call this business rule, in this case, high value RFC. And we're basing this decision on the estimate given by the solution manager. If you remember, the solution manager estimated the cost and the number of days. So we go to the solution manager form, and we find the information. Here we are, the preliminary cost estimate. So if that is greater than £100,000, will be true. Otherwise, it will be false. So here we are. We've made the change. I, of course, need to add some more links after this, but again, for the purposes of time, I'll leave it at this point. But what will happen, once the internal approval has been given by the project team, Sequence will calculate this business rule. If the cost estimate is over £100,000, we'll go to a second level of approval. And of course, in a real situation, only if that second level of approval is given will we then proceed with this particular request for change. If it's rejected, we'll obviously loop back to earlier in the process or possibly even cancel this particular request for change. Okay, so there we've quickly shown how the PMO manager can improve her process and make it a more robust process. Very quickly, a change can be made to the process so that change is managed for that particular customer that much quicker. Of course, that change could have been done to the master template that applies best practice to all customers, or it could be done on a per customer basis. Okay, so that ends the demonstration.
James, many thanks for that. We're just going to quickly go through a case study now, which talks to one of our large global SI customers that have deployed Sequence to manage one of their large government contracts here in the UK.
Just bear with me a second while I share it.
The important point about the case study, I think, from a business perspective, is that our customer received a return on investment in 3 months. And as we go through the case study, I'll explain more. The solution they required was to provide a consistent but simple to use and give the user experience, which are mainly provisionally business users, something that had a Microsoft look and feel. That meant, as a benefit, there wasn't a lot of training. They were able to deploy the solution very quickly and get the active users using the system at an organizational level, which provided a great return on time and expense. The key thing for the executive was being able to allow the senior PMO management at a glance to see how the RFC process was performing for that particular government customer across the board, and allow them to understand the monetary values associated with each stage of the process to improve their decision making, but also the reporting back to their client. The collaboration aspect of the business process outsourcing environment, keeping their customer up to speed with what was going on internally within their process, was pretty key. The interesting thing here was that actually a lot of the customers' view of their supplier, now that everything was visible, allowed the supplier to actually start explaining to their customer that a lot of the problems started within their customer environment because they were able to prove things. So, such as half the forms not being filled in when requesting a change, and therefore the ping-ponging that existed between forms going backwards and forwards stopped, and just that simple improved efficiency meant that the customer-supplier relationship was strengthened. It allowed various different stakeholders of the group to work more effectively and collaboratively. So everybody understood that as a process, their part of the work had been validated before it got to them. So they knew that when a piece of work was arriving into their in-tray, that the process had generally been staged and and the gateway process had been formulated, and therefore they knew the clock was ticking, and that they knew, because of the validations on the forms, that the information is now correct. So again, it reduced the amount of rework and testing of information, because they knew that the information they were receiving was absolutely correct and in real time. One of the key things was being able to provide a platform for automating the processes, the general administration that allowed for document control and document handling, and any comments to be added as the process for change went through the BPO office, was pretty key to improving the effectiveness of the operation. And it allowed the PMO management then to feel confident that the solution was something that they could promote within other managed accounts within their managed operations division. But the customer saw this very much as innovation over and above the initial BPO contract, and that the project management office was seen as key innovators in managing the contract. So the benefits were a faster turnaround of the request for change, reducing the internal project management office costs, reducing the amount of resources that were handling the RFC, and being able to report back to the customer in a timely fashion and improving the customer relationship. Accurate real-time dashboards allowed the executives in the operation and the operational stakeholders to have a more dynamic relationship, and it massively improved their decision making and decision tracking. One of the key benefits and one of the costs was getting all the PMO executives in an office once a week to review schedules, resources and decisions. There was a lot of cost in doing that, both in time and delaying decisions, and that was removed at a stroke. Being able to share information on an approval basis meant that the client was now improving their own internal decisions, and that the project initiation process, which is linked to the change request process in the customer environment, was key to improving the full end-to-end life cycle of change management. They were able to massively improve the governance controls within the process and tie things back to the contractual documentation, and that meant that there a greater level of trust developed between the supplier and the customer that has eventually led to an extension on the contract. Some principal costs were reduced by getting rid of a lot of rework and duplication, getting rid of all the spreadsheets and access database that existed at a very local level, and also meant that the email system wasn't just a dumping ground for emails and inboxes, but actually became an integral part of how routing and escalations were helping support the request for change as a process within the supplier. It ensured that the RFCs were correctly scoped and budgeted early on in the life cycle, so that people and resources and time were not wasted only to have the project not go forward. They were able to manage their customer a lot tighter, and this also improved the monetary value forecast, because now they were only forecasting real projects that had real budget with a real outcome. And the PMO was able to support its key performance indicators against the contractual service level agreements by presenting real-time quarterly information for customer contract reviews, again reinforcing the trust and the communication aspects, and also improving the humanistic aspects of a major government contract. All those things have helped support the our customer getting their extension with this large UK government contract. Our customer, the BPO provider, estimated a return of investment of a 1:5 ratio in the first year. This was achieved by both the removal and the reallocation of employees within the process, within the PMO, around a lot of the administration. Now that the administration is automated, those employees that were handling a lot of back office tasks could be deployed to customer front-end activity. The management efficiency meant that a lot of the executives were able to get out of review meetings and review cycles, improve their decision making, and again interface and interact with their customer. The amount of lost or aborted RFCs were massively reduced. There was one stat that said that they had 360 RFCs that were greater than 15 days waiting to be actioned, and they were able to reduce that to 15% of that 360 number within a short space of time. It meant there was a lot less administration for the solution managers, who could then use that time to deploy their intellect to what they were actually employed to do, which was coming up with innovative solutions for their customer. The same administration reduction for the PMO managers, which meant that they could spend more time engaging with their customer, improving customer relations and satisfaction levels. And importantly, it improved the internal reporting and forecasting from the PMO into the executive of the BPO provider. They were able to prioritise the RFCs and bring forward revenues into the quarter, improving the bottom line not only of the PMO but for the organisation as a whole. So as a wrap up, we'd like to thank you for your time. Hopefully that's been an interesting use of the last hour. One of the things that we offer our prospective customers is a 4-hour dedicated workshop that would allow us to interact with you around a particular process, where the output could be a project outline and an estimated cost and ROI on that process. And if that's of any interest, please feel free to contact me at the address shown or James Luxford. Now, if there are any questions,